Hello, my name is Greg Jenner. I am a public historian, which means my job is to try and make history interesting and accessible to the general public, many of whom find history difficult and boring or hard, or they didn't like doing it at school. So I try and use popular culture and also particularly humour, comedy, to try and make history enjoyable for people. And I do this a number of ways. I am a broadcaster, so I have two podcasts on the BBC. One is called You're Dead to Me, and the other one is called Homeschool History for Children. And I also am a historical advisor. I work in movies and drama to help make shows and films a bit more accurate. I also am the historical advisor and one of the writers on a UK comedy show called Horrible Histories for Children, which is very successful and won lots of awards, which is very nice. And then, of course, I'm a writer. And so this is my third book. It's called Ask a Historian. And the idea is quite simple. I wanted to know, what does the public want to know? So I asked them. Ordinarily, I would have gone around the country doing my book tour for my last book, Dead Famous, which is about the history of celebrity. I would have gone around the UK and asked all the audiences to ask me any question at all. Unfortunately, COVID ruined everything, of course, but we've done it online instead. So we created a form. We asked my Twitter followers. I've got about 100,000 Twitter followers, so I got a nice, good number of people sending in questions. And then we chose the 50 best questions, the funniest ones, most surprising ones, the ones that represent global history as well as European history. And then we've basically corralled those into different themes, different little mini chapters. There's five answers in each theme, really. And let me run you through some of the questions. I won't do all of them, I promise. 50 is a lot of questions, but I'll go through some of my favourites. So we have, who was the richest person in history? Very difficult to answer, but I've suggested three possibilities because actually it's very hard to do these things accurately. But perhaps Emperor Augustus, perhaps Emperor Mansa Musa of 14th century Mali in West Africa, and potentially a German banker called Jakob Fugger in the 16th century. There's a fun one about the dead Pope trial, which is where a Pope was put on trial in the 800s. So his corpse was interrogated, a bizarre story. Someone asked me how much accuracy there is in the cartoon The Flintstones, whether the Stone Age archaeology is at all right. And surprisingly, yeah, some of it is. Other people asked me a really important one, actually, about Atlantis and aliens. This is a real problem. It's happening a lot, particularly in American media and American documentaries. The idea that aliens built the pyramids, aliens built Atlantis. It's got a long history, goes back to the Greeks, of course, but in the 19th century, it became actually attached to racist ideas of Aryan supremacy, and then unfortunately became even more serious during the Third Reich under Hitler and his advisors. So that's a really important one. Not quite so funny, but the kind of thing we have to talk about. I got asked a lot of questions about medicine, so we've done one on the history of women's menstrual hygiene. So how did women in the past deal with their periods? We've done one on the history of hay fever. Who first identified it? Who called it hay fever? It was first identified by Persian scholars in the Islamic world, but funny enough, actually, in the 19th century, it was associated with being white and being intellectual. It was believed to be a racist disease that only clever white intellectuals could get. So it was attached to basically eugenics, which is kind of a bit weird. There's a question about eating mummies. People in 17th century Europe used to eat ground up human beings to make them better. Very weird. There's one about what are the weirdest medical cures from history which actually worked. And the most surprising one was an Anglo-Saxon recipe, or a recipe from the early medieval period, which was shown to kill MRSA, the deadly superbug in hospitals. So this is 1,200 years old. This medicine works. There's a great question about which society in history would best be able to fight off zombies. I argue the Vikings, for a lot of reasons. And there's also a couple of really interesting questions about my own personal sort of preferences and things. Someone asked me, who from history would I put together for a team to pull off a bank heist? So basically, like an Ocean's 11. If I was George Clooney, who would I have on my team? So I've chosen people from history to help me. People from the French Resistance, a couple of really famous people from the medieval world, a Chinese scholar called Su Song, an Islamic scholar who was a chess master. I've got an ancient Egyptian tomb robber. I've got a couple of 19th century Americans, including including a person of color who escaped from slavery and then became a magician. So you want him to break in. So that was a really fun one to do. And next one that was fun as well was people asking me my opinion on films and popular culture and movies and accuracy. This is something I teach in a couple of universities, so I really like talking about that. There was a great question about sign language, the history of sign language, which was really surprising because actually the history of sign language goes back a long way, but also in the medieval period, in the early modern period, sign language was accepted in wedding ceremonies and in legal trials. So that's quite surprising. And then, of course, we get to Alexander Graham Bell and the development of kind of audio technology. And he really didn't want deaf people to do sign language. He wanted them to learn to lip read. So it's quite a sad story in the end. There are some really interesting ones about communication. So someone asked me, how did people communicate in ancient China? Because it's such a massive empire. How did news get spread? So that's about the postal system and the messaging system. Really interesting. There was one about translators. How did translators work when two empires were trying to talk to each other? How do you do diplomacy if you can't speak the same language? So that was really fun. There's a nice one about why do cities have different names in different languages. So London, Londres, Munich, München, Monaco. It's called Monaco in Italian. So that was fun to do. That's something that's basically called an exonym. It's a name given to people or a place by people who don't live there. There's some fun ones about famous artworks. So why are there so many penises in the Bayeux Tapestry? I enjoy doing that one, in fairness. Why are the penises on Greek statues so small? Also fun to do. One about Genghis Khan. There was a study done about 10 years ago that scientists said that he reversed global warming because he killed so many people. So I've tried to figure out if that's true or not. Someone asked me, why is Italy called Italy? Really interesting. I didn't know this, and I looked into it. It's very complicated. It goes way, way back to the pre-Romans, and then, of course, was revived later on. So it's a really fun one. A very difficult one that took me 3 weeks to research was how are the boundaries of modern African nations, where did they start and at what point did they coalesce into their current form? So that's all to do with European colonialism in the 19th century. And I also did a nice answer about Ashanti Ghana and their golden stool, a very famous sort of magical throne that was very, very important and caused a war with Britain in the 19th century. There are some fun ones as well, some slightly different ones. So who invented maths? That's ancient Greeks, ancient Babylonians, ancient India, Arabian mathematics as well. Who invented mirrors? So there we can go back to the Stone Age. We can go to Çatalhöyük in Turkey, and then to Egypt, and then to the Romans, and then to Venice, and then to Louis XIV and his Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. Someone asked me, when was the first Monday? Well, that's all to do with telling the time and days of the week and calendars. So again, back to the Babylonians and the Romans. There was a fun one on who wrote the first ever joke book. The ancient Greeks had the first ever joke book. So I've tried to translate some of their jokes and to see if they are still funny now. I think some of them are. Not all of them, in fairness. And a couple of more interesting ones. Where did high heels come from? Medieval Persia. And they were actually worn by warriors, male warriors in battle. And they became a fashion accessory in Europe. And then gradually women started wearing them. And by the 19th century, they became only worn by women. But they started as being worn by men. Why is the devil a goat? Baphomet in the tarot card. Why does he look like a goat? This is a very complicated one, going back to the ancient Greeks, through the kind of Mesopotamian world, into the Middle Ages and the Crusades and anti-Muslim propaganda, and then into 19th century France, where scholars tried to kind of put this all together with their kind of tarot mysticism. Another one that's quite surprising, a long history, is who was the first vegetarian? Well, you can look in India, you can look in China, you can look in Greece with Pythagoras is one of the most famous ones. How old is curry? Again, you can go back to the Bronze Age, or you have to go to the 19th century, because some people would argue that curry is a British invention because the people of Southeast Asia didn't call it curry. So really, in a lot of ways, it's a kind of colonial invention. And I really liked answering the one about who invented meringue as well. I love meringues. I find them delicious. And there we're going to France, we're going to Britain, we're going to Poland as well, I think. So yeah, I kind of around the book, I've ended up looking at history from around the world, a bit of Egypt, a bit of China, some Africa, a lot of America, a lot of Europe, a lot of UK, of course, some France, a bit of Germany, some Italy. trying to make sure that the book is nicely balanced. There's lots of funny stories, there's some surprising ones, some stuff that's really important that we know, some things which are just funny and just nice to know, and obviously different themes so that people can just flick through and look things up. And if they fancy reading about medicine, they can. If they want to read more about fashion or medicine in terms of looking good, they can do that too. So hopefully it's the kind of book that you'd like to read. It was a lot of fun to write, and I hope it's fun to enjoy as a reader. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much for your patience, and take care. Thank you. Bye.